You ever been in a place in life where you're doing everything right, but somehow things just don't seem to add up? You're praying, you're showing up, you're giving, you're trying, and yet the doors stay locked, the path stays foggy, and the breakthrough feels delayed. And you start to wonder, God, what am I missing? Family, what if I told you there's a cheat code? Now, don't get it twisted. I'm not talking about cheating people or cutting corners. I'm talking about a divine secret strategy that heaven has placed inside your struggle. Something God only reveals to those who are triggered enough to seek him through the pain. Because sometimes the thing that triggers you the most is actually the thing that teaches you the secret. Today, I came to talk to the ones who feel stuck, frustrated, overlooked, tired of waiting, but still holding on to faith. You've been triggered, but what you don't realize is that trigger is not meant to destroy you. It's meant to unlock you. Every single one of us has a trigger, something that sets off emotion, frustration, anger, insecurity, or fear. It might be the way someone talks to you, a rejection that reminds you of your past, a delay that stirs up impatience, or a failure that brings back feelings of shame. Most people see triggers as negative, as something to avoid or suppress, but the truth is deeper. What if your trigger isn't meant to destroy you, but to develop you? What if the very thing that frustrates you is actually the thing that God is using to form you? God never wastes pain. He never allows a trigger without a purpose. When you start to feel that surge of emotion, that irritation, that disappointment, that moment where you want to react, that's not just random, it's a signal that something inside of you is being touched, tested, and trained. Because before God promotes you, he always exposes you. Before he enlarges your platform, he refines your character. And the trigger is often the tool he uses to reveal what still needs healing. Think about how gold is purified. It's placed in fire, not to be destroyed, but to remove the impurities. The heat doesn't damage the gold. It reveals its true value. That's what your triggers do. They bring to the surface what's hidden, insecurity, pride, control, not so that God can condemn you, but so that he can cleanse you. Every time you're triggered, heaven is holding up a mirror saying, this is the area I want to work on. This is where you're still reacting instead of responding. This is the space where I want to grow you. When you see life through that lens, you stop asking, why is this happening to me? And start asking, God, what are you teaching me through this? The trigger becomes your teacher. It stops being a weapon against you and starts being a classroom for your character. The same people who irritate you are often the people God uses to train you in patience. The same situations that discourage you are designed to stretch your faith. The same rejections that once broke you are the ones that now strengthen your resilience. The problem is many of us try to avoid the trigger instead of addressing the root. We change environments, block people, quit jobs, end friendships, thinking the discomfort will disappear. But until the lesson is learned, the trigger will follow you because God isn't interested in just changing your circumstances. He wants to change you within them. And he loves you too much to let you stay the same. When you start to understand this, the next time something sets you off, you won't run away from it. You'll pause, you'll breathe, you'll say, okay, God, I see it. I feel it. What are you trying to show me here? That moment of self-awareness is the doorway to spiritual maturity. Because spiritual growth isn't about avoiding pain. It's about interpreting it correctly. It's realizing that every irritation carries revelation, every pressure carries promotion, and every wound carries wisdom. Look at Joseph, triggered by betrayal, sold by his brothers, forgotten in prison. Yet through each painful moment, God was developing his integrity, endurance, and leadership. Look at David, triggered by jealousy, hunted by Saul, yet through those seasons of hiding, God was shaping his humility and dependence. Even Jesus was triggered, rejected, misunderstood, falsely accused, yet through his suffering came salvation. None of them were destroyed by their triggers. They were developed by them. That's what God is doing in your life. The same situation that makes you want to give up is the very situation that's building your spiritual muscles. The frustration is producing faith. The pressure is producing purpose. The tears are watering transformation. You're not being punished, you're being prepared. The trigger isn't evidence that God has abandoned you. It's proof that he's still working on you. Every time you feel it, remember, it's not the end of you. It's the beginning of a stronger, wiser, more grounded version of you being born in the fire of your trigger. In life, Everyone is searching for a shortcut to success, a faster way to reach the destination, a method that guarantees progress without the pain of process. But in the kingdom of God, the real cheat code is not found in skipping steps or finding loopholes. It's found in obedience. True elevation doesn't come from manipulation. It comes from submission. When you obey God, even when it doesn't make sense, you unlock a level of grace and power that human strength could never achieve. Obedience and faith together are what creates supernatural breakthrough. They are the divine equation that turns ordinary steps into extraordinary results. Faith is the belief that God can, but obedience is the decision to act like He will. You can't just believe in your head and stay still. You have to move your feet in the direction of His promise. Sometimes that means walking away from something comfortable, forgiving someone who hurts you, giving when it feels impossible, or saying yes to something that scares you. Every act of obedience is a seed that carries the potential of breakthrough. You may not see the fruit immediately, but faith says, God, even if I can't see it, I still trust that you're working. Many people miss their miracle because they stop at belief and never step into obedience. They want the blessing without the building process, the victory without the vulnerability. But God's system doesn't operate like the world's. He hides blessing inside obedience. The moment you decide to follow His instruction, even the small ones, you access favor that you could never earn. Noah didn't wait for rain to build the ark. He built the ark before the first drop fell. Abraham didn't see the ram until he raised the knife. Peter didn't walk on water until he stepped out of the boat. The breakthrough always follows obedience, not the other way around. That's the kingdom cheat code, doing what God says even when your feelings disagree. Because your faith is not proven by what you say, it's proven by what you do. When obedience costs you something, when God tells you to give up control, to forgive, to trust again, to take a step, that's when the real test begins. It's not that God needs your obedience to bless you. He uses obedience to prepare you for the blessing. Sometimes He delays the promise, not because you're denied, but because you're still developing the capacity to carry it. Faith without obedience is like having the code but never entering it. You can have all the information and revelation, but if you don't activate it with action, it stays locked. Every promise of God requires participation. You can't just quote the verse, you've got to live it. Yeah. You can't just know the word, you've got to walk it. And that's where obedience comes in. It connects what you believe with how you behave. When you move in obedience, you're saying, God, I trust your way more than my own understanding. That's when God begins to open doors that no man can shut. That's when He takes your little and multiplies it. That's when He turns your pain into purpose, your test into testimony. Obedience isn't glamorous, but it's powerful. It's the hidden key that separates those who talk about faith from those who live by it. And it's not about perfection. It's about direction. God doesn't expect you to get everything right. He just wants your heart to be postured toward Him. When you combine obedience with faith, you become unstoppable. Not because you're strong, but because you're aligned. You're no longer trying to make things happen in your own strength. You're flowing with the rhythm of grace. And that's where the cheat code activates, because the moment you choose to obey in faith, heaven starts moving on your behalf. Things shift, resources appear, timing aligns, and what looked impossible becomes inevitable. Faith gives you the courage to believe, but obedience gives God permission to perform. When something or someone triggers you, the first instinct is almost always to react, to defend yourself, to prove your point, to respond out of emotion. It's natural, it's human. It's automatic. But maturity and faith teaches you that not every reaction deserves your energy, and not every trigger deserves a response. The moment you choose to pause instead of react, you begin to step into a different dimension of wisdom. You move from reacting emotionally to decoding spiritually, because everything that happens to you carries a message within it. And if you react too quickly, you'll miss the meaning. When Jesus walked this earth, He faced constant triggers, rejection, betrayal, criticism, misunderstanding, yet He rarely reacted the way people expected Him to. He paused, discerned, and responded with purpose. When the Pharisees tried to trap Him with their words, He didn't get angry or defensive. He bent down and wrote in the sand. When Judas betrayed Him, He didn't expose or shame him. He still called him friend. When Peter denied Him, He didn't condemn him. He restored him. That's not emotional reaction. That's divine decoding. Jesus understood that reacting gives power to the trigger, but decoding gives power to your purpose. Most of us lose battles not because the enemy is strong, but because we react too soon. We let temporary emotions make permanent decisions. We let a moment of offense destroy years of connection. We let fear dictate our faith. But when you learn to decode the moment, you start asking different questions. Instead of, why is this happening to me? You ask God, what are you showing me through this? That shift changes everything, because what triggers you reveals what still controls you. If you can identify it, you can overcome it. Decoding the moment means understanding that behind every irritation, there's an invitation from God to grow, to heal, to release something that no longer serves your destiny. Every person that gets under your skin, every situation that tests your patience, every disappointment that challenges your hope, all of it is part of a divine lesson. God uses people and pressure to develop spiritual maturity. If you only react, you repeat cycles. But if you decode, you break them. There's a difference between reacting from emotion and responding from revelation. Emotion says, I'm hurt, so I'll hurt you back. Revelation says, I'm hurt, but I'll heal. Emotion says, I'm offended, so I'll withdraw. Revelation says, I'm offended, but I'll forgive. Emotion seeks control. Revelation seeks growth. The more you practice decoding, the less power your triggers have over you. You start to walk in peace instead of panic, purpose instead of pride. The enemy thrives on reaction because reaction is impulsive. It blinds you, distracts you, and makes you forget who you are. But when you choose to decode, you slow down enough to hear God's voice. The Holy Spirit becomes your interpreter, revealing the hidden lesson in the moment. You begin to see that the person who hurt you wasn't just a problem. They were a mirror reflecting an unhealed place in your heart. You realize that the delay wasn't denial. It was development, that the conflict wasn't a curse. It was a classroom. Decoding requires humility. It's the decision to say, before I speak, I'll seek. Before I act, I'll ask. Before I respond, I'll reflect. That doesn't make you weak, it makes you wise. Because wisdom is not how fast you move, but how accurately you discern. The strongest people are not the ones who fight back. They're the ones who stay centered when everything around them tries to provoke them. When you live by reaction, your emotions run your life. When you live by revelation, your spirit leads your life. The difference between reacting and decoding is the difference between chaos and clarity. One drains your energy, the other develops your character. One leaves you empty, the other fills you with understanding. The next time life presses your buttons, don't react out of the old version of you. Decode it through the new version God is forming. Because decoding doesn't just change how you handle the moment, it changes how the moment shapes you. Grace is the most misunderstood power in the kingdom of God. Many people think grace is just mercy, a free pass for mistakes or a soft cushion for failure. But grace is far greater than that. Grace is the hidden advantage that God gives his children. It's divine strength working through human weakness. It's the invisible force that carries you when effort runs out. Grace is not the absence of work, it's the presence of power. When you understand that, you stop striving for control and start resting in God's ability. The world runs on performance. Do more, achieve more, prove more, but the kingdom runs on grace. Grace says you don't have to earn what has already been given. When you live by grace, you realize that your worth was settled before your work began. God didn't choose you because you were perfect. He chose you because he knew you'd need his help. Grace is not a backup plan. It's the entire strategy of heaven. It's God saying, I know your flaws, I know your failures, but I'm still going to use you. Grace looks at your limitations and says, watch what I can do with that. That's why Paul said, when I am weak, then I am strong. Because weakness is not a liability in God's hands. It's an entry point for his power. Every area you feel unqualified in is an opportunity for grace to shine through you. The danger is that many people still try to live by effort instead of grace. They burn out trying to do in their strength what can only be done by his Spirit. They measure themselves by results instead of relationship. But grace doesn't perform for approval. It operates from acceptance. You don't work for God's love. You work from it. You don't strive to be chosen. You move because you already are. That's the hidden advantage of grace. It frees you from the constant pressure to prove yourself. Grace doesn't make life easier. It makes it possible. It empowers you to forgive when you've been deeply hurt. It enables you to stay peaceful in chaos, to stay faithful in delay, to stay hopeful in disappointment. When life hits hard, grace whispers, "You're not doing this alone." It reminds you that God is still present in the struggle, still strong in the weakness, still faithful when everything feels unstable. The people around you may not see it, but grace is carrying you through things that would have crushed you years ago. Grace also changes how you view others. When you realize how much grace you've received, you become more willing to extend it. It humbles you. You stop judging people for their process because you remember your own. You stop holding grudges because you understand mercy. Grace transforms your heart into a reflection of God's patience. It teaches you to love people through their growth instead of condemning them for not being there yet. Grace sees potential even in brokenness. When you walk in grace, you start to depend less on your plans and more on His presence. You begin to realize that everything you've accomplished, every door that opened, every blessing you carry, none of it was your doing alone. It was grace all along. The meetings that aligned, the opportunities that found you, the peace that sustained you in storms, grace was behind it all. Grace is not passive, it's powerful. It fights for you when you're too tired to fight for yourself. It lifts you when shame tries to bury you. It reminds you that God's power is still greater than your past, your mistakes, and your weakness. So when you hit a wall, when you feel like your strength is gone, that's not your ending, it's grace's beginning. That's when God steps in and says, "No, let me show you what I can do." The world says you need more effort. Grace says you just need more surrender. Because grace isn't earned by perfection, it's activated by trust. The more you depend on God, the more His grace flows through you. And when grace becomes your rhythm, you stop competing, comparing, and complaining. You start living with confidence, peace, and power that no circumstance can take away. Life moves fast, and in the middle of that speed, we often mistake motion for progress. We think if we're constantly doing, constantly moving, constantly pushing forward, we must be winning. But spiritually, the opposite is true. The kingdom doesn't advance through panic, it advances through presence. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is not move at all, but pause. Prayer is that pause, the sacred space where you stop striving and start listening. Just like in a game where pressing the pause button doesn't erase your level or end your progress, prayer doesn't stop your destiny. It simply gives you perspective. It's God's way of saying, take a breath, look again, and remember who's really in control. Prayer is not a timeout, it's a tune in. It realigns your heart with heaven's rhythm. When life triggers you, when situations frustrate you, when emotions rise, that's your cue to pause and pray. The world will tell you to react, to fix, to fight, to post, to prove. But God whispers, be still, because in stillness, He speaks the loudest. That's the power of prayer. It slows down the noise of the world long enough for you to hear the voice of God. Every time you pray, you choose peace over panic. You say, God, I don't have to control this because I trust you already do. In prayer, you find strength you didn't know you had. When the weight of life feels heavy, prayer lifts it off your shoulders and places it in God's hands. When confusion clouds your vision, prayer clears the fog and restores clarity. When fear grips your heart, prayer reminds you that you're not alone. It's in those moments of pausing that faith is rekindled. You begin to realize that prayer doesn't just change your situation, it changes your posture. It doesn't always remove the storm, but it changes how you stand in it. You come out of prayer with a quiet confidence that says, even if it hasn't changed yet, I know God's still working. Most of us are too busy playing the game of life to pause long enough to let God download new strategy. We keep pressing buttons, trying to figure things out on our own, but we miss the voice of the one who actually knows the level ahead. That's why prayer is a cheat code, not because it manipulates God, but because it positions you to receive direction. You can't hear divine instruction while your spirit is in chaos. The pause doesn't delay your progress, it preserves it. It protects you from making decisions based on emotion rather than revelation. Every person God used greatly had a habit of pausing. Jesus often withdrew from the crowd to pray. Before choosing His disciples, before performing miracles, before facing the cross, He paused, He prayed. He realigned His human heart with His divine purpose. If Jesus, who was perfect, needed to pause for perspective, how much more do we? Prayer is not weakness, it's wisdom. It's saying, I refuse to move until I know I'm moving with God. When you live like that, you stop wasting time fighting unnecessary battles. You begin to flow with divine timing instead of forcing your own. Prayer also guards your peace. It reminds you that progress isn't just about speed, it's about stability. You can be moving fast but still be off track. You can be busy but not productive, active but not aligned. But when you pause in prayer, God brings your focus back to what truly matters. He whispers, stay planted, stay patient, stay present. The pause builds your endurance so that when it's time to move again, you move with purpose instead of pressure. The reason many believers feel exhausted is not because they're far from God, but because they're too busy to pause with Him. They try to fight battles in their own strength, forgetting that the secret to winning is not fighting harder, but resting deeper. The pause in prayer is your moment to recharge spiritually, emotionally, and mentally. It's the reset button that allows you to continue your assignment with peace instead of panic, strength instead of strain. Prayer doesn't change how fast life moves. It changes how you move through life. It transforms frantic energy into focused faith. It's your spiritual pause that keeps your purpose alive. Transformation never comes without tension. You cannot change without being challenged, and you cannot grow without being stretched. The truth that most people avoid is that transformation often begins with a trigger. The very thing that irritates you, that tests you, that exposes your weaknesses or insecurities is often the thing that God uses to shape you into the version of yourself He designed from the beginning. Everyone loves the idea of transformation, becoming stronger, wiser, freer. But few want to face what activates it. Triggers are the chisels in God's hands, carving away everything in you that doesn't look like Him. When you are triggered, it's because something in you is still alive that God is trying to crucify. Maybe it's pride, maybe control, maybe pain you never dealt with. Triggers reveal what transformation requires. God doesn't waste emotions. He uses them as indicators. The things that upset you, the people who test your patience, the moments that expose your fragility, those are not coincidences. They are invitations to transformation. Every time you're triggered, heaven is saying, let's deal with this now so it doesn't destroy you later. The trigger is not punishment, it's preparation. It's God showing you where healing still needs to happen. Look at how God operates throughout Scripture. Moses was triggered by rejection and inadequacy. Yet through those feelings, God taught him humility and leadership. Peter was triggered by failure when he denied Jesus. Yet that same trigger became the birthplace of his boldness. Paul was triggered by a thorn in his flesh. Yet that constant discomfort kept him dependent on grace. Every transformation story begins with a trigger because the trigger brings awareness, and awareness is the first step to healing. You cannot be transformed by what you refuse to confront. The problem is most people run from the trigger instead of running through it. We avoid difficult conversations, suppress painful emotions, and hide behind business, thinking that time alone will heal what time didn't cause. But healing doesn't happen by avoidance. It happens through confrontation, not confrontation with others, but with yourself. Transformation demands honesty. You have to be willing to admit, yes, this hurts me, or this offends me, or this scares me, and then invite God into that space, because God cannot heal what you hide, and He cannot transform what you pretend is already whole. The trigger is the doorway to breakthrough if you're willing to walk through it. Every emotional reaction is an opportunity to pause and ask God, what are you revealing about me through this moment? Maybe the person who keeps triggering you isn't your problem. Maybe they're your mirror. They reflect what's unhealed inside of you. When you learn to see triggers as teachers instead of threats, you grow. You start responding differently. Instead of lashing out, you listen. Instead of running away, you reflect. Instead of collapsing, you pray. That's when transformation begins to take root, not in the absence of triggers, but in how you handle them. Transformation is never comfortable. It strips away false identities, exposes old wounds, and requires surrender. But on the other side of that discomfort is freedom. The pain that once triggered you begins to lose its power. The memories that once paralyzed you start to strengthen you. You begin to see that every moment of irritation was actually divine intervention. God wasn't trying to hurt you. He was trying to heal you. He was using the heat of your triggers to refine your character, to test your faith, to grow your patience, and to deepen your dependence on Him. True transformation is not about changing your behavior. It's about changing your nature. It's when you stop responding out of the old version of you and start responding out of the healed version God is forming. That's why being triggered is part of the journey. It's how you learn who you were, who you are, and who you're becoming. The trigger may start with tension, but if you let God do his work, it always ends with transformation.